She stood on the dock with the envelope held flat against her chest, as if the wind might try to steal it from her. The ship loomed above her, white, enormous, impossibly confident, a floating city preparing to slip quietly out of the country and into open water. Around her, people laughed, adjusted bags, and took photos. Families clustered together. Couples leaned into each other as if this journey were a celebration. For her, it was not. She had not come for luxury or escape. She had come because staying home had finally become unbearable. Inside the envelope were the ashes, sealed carefully, and a letter she had rewritten 3 times before deciding no version would ever feel complete. Some things, she had learned, were never finished properly. They were simply carried. The line moved. Her passport was scanned. A key card was handed to her, a cabin number printed neatly on a sleeve. "Welcome aboard," the crew member said, smiling without really looking at her. She smiled back out of habit. As she stepped onto the gangway, she felt it. Not fear exactly, but something tightening just beneath her ribs. A sense of crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. She paused for half a second and glanced back at the shoreline. No one noticed. No one ever did. The ship swallowed her easily. Inside, everything gleamed. Polished railings, soft music, the low hum of engines already alive beneath the floor. Crew moved with practiced confidence, guiding passengers as though they had rehearsed this moment endlessly. Her cabin was small but tidy, neutral colors, and a narrow balcony looking out toward the water. She placed the envelope gently on the desk, smoothing her hand over it once before setting her suitcase down. Tomorrow, she would do what she had come to do. Tonight, she would let the sea carry her. Later, after dinner she barely tasted, she wandered. The ship invited wandering, curved hallways, soft lighting, staircases that led somewhere new every time. She followed signs half-heartedly, reading them without taking them in. It was when she turned down a corridor, she didn't recognize that she felt it again, that tightening beneath her ribs. The carpet changed color, the lighting dimmed, the music faded, replaced by the quiet mechanical breath of the ship itself. A sign on the wall read, "Crew only," though part of the lettering was lost in shadow. She hesitated, then heard voices. Low, controlled, not hurried, careful. She didn't mean to stop or look, but something in her had learned long ago that certain moments announced themselves quietly, and if you ignored them, they followed you forever. She took one more step forward. That was when she saw him. Not surrounded by staff, not posing, no cameras. Just a man standing slightly apart from the others, posture precise, face composed in a way she recognized immediately. She had seen that face on television. He was supposed to be elsewhere. One of the men spoke a phrase she didn't recognize, not a language she knew but something rehearsed. Another handed over a sealed container, smooth and clinical, like something meant for medicine rather than cargo. The politician nodded once, then his eyes lifted. They met hers for only a second, but it was long enough. No one shouted. No one moved. No one told her to leave. They simply looked at her, and then turned away as if she had already ceased to exist. Her heart began to pound, not with panic, but with something colder. Instinct. She stepped back slowly, retracing her path until the familiar carpet returned beneath her feet. She told herself she was imagining things, that she had misunderstood, that it was none of her business. She returned to her cabin and closed the door. Only then did she notice that her hands were shaking. She slept poorly that night. And sometime between the darkness and the early hum of morning, a decision was made, not by her, but about her. A keystroke, a record altered, a name removed. She woke to the sound of the sea and the low vibration of the engines beneath the floor. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memory returned, the corridor, the container, the man's eyes lifting to meet hers. She sat up slowly, her hand resting on the envelope as if it could steady her. Today, she reminded herself. Today was the reason she had come. She dressed and stepped into the hallway, joining the gentle morning movement of the ship. Breakfast was a blur. The food tasted like nothing. She kept expecting something to happen. A tap on the shoulder, a question asked too casually. But nothing did. Around her, life continued exactly as it should. Laughter, cutlery clinking, crew members greeting passengers by name. It was when she returned to her cabin that the first thing went wrong. Her keycard hesitated. She slid it through the reader again. A soft beep, but the light stayed red. She frowned and tried once more, slower this time, holding the card flat as she had been shown. The door remained locked. A crew member passing in the hallway paused. "Is everything all right?" he asked politely. "My card doesn't seem to be working," she said, holding it up. He took it, scanned it with a small handheld device, then frowned slightly. "What cabin did you say?" She told him. He checked again. "That's strange," he said, smiling as though it were nothing. "Let me take you to guest services. They'll sort it out." Guest services was bright and busy, the kind of place designed to soothe irritation before it could turn into anger. She waited while the attendant typed her name into the system. The smile on the woman's face flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into place. "I'm sorry," the attendant said. "Could you repeat your surname?" She did. The attendant typed again, more carefully this time. "I'm not seeing a booking under that name." "There must be a mistake," she said quietly. "I checked in yesterday. I have a cabin." The attendant nodded, still pleasant. "Of course. Do you have your booking confirmation?" "It's on my phone," she said, then stopped. Her phone was in her cabin, the cabin she could not access. The attendant glanced at the screen once more. "Are you sure you boarded this ship?" The question landed heavily, though it was asked gently. Around them, other passengers shifted, waited, sighed. The world moved forward, uninterested in her growing unease. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." The attendant exchanged a look with another staff member. "Let me get a supervisor," she said. They asked her to wait. Minutes passed, then more. When the supervisor arrived, his tone was courteous but distant. He asked for her name again, her date of birth, her nationality. Each time she answered, he typed, paused, and frowned slightly. "I'm afraid I can't find any record of you boarding this vessel," he said at last. "There's no cabin assigned to you." "That's impossible," she said. "I slept in it last night." He nodded as if humoring her. "Perhaps you were visiting another passenger." "No," she said, her voice tightening. "I was alone." The supervisor smiled thinly. "Without a record, there's not much I can do." Something shifted inside her then. A quiet click of understanding that made her chest feel hollow. She looked around the desk, at the screens, the smiling brochures, the efficient calm of the place. They weren't confused. They were done. "I need my passport," she said. "It's in my cabin." The supervisor hesitated. "Without a cabin assignment, I can't authorize access." Her mouth went dry. "Then how do I get it?" He folded his hands. "We'll need to escalate this to security." The words settled between them, heavy and final. As she followed him down the corridor, she caught her reflection in a mirrored panel. Composed, tidy, perfectly ordinary. A woman who had boarded a ship with purpose. A woman who, according to every screen they passed, did not exist. And somewhere deep within the ship's systems, her name remained absent, cleanly removed, as though it had never been there at all. Security was nothing like she expected. There were no raised voices, no handcuffs, no dramatic accusations. Instead, There was quiet efficiency, calm men and women in neat uniforms, polite smiles that did not quite reach their eyes. She was asked to sit in a small room just off a main corridor, its walls bare except for a framed evacuation map. "Just routine," one of them said. "We'll clear this up." They asked the same questions again. Her name, her date of birth, where she had boarded, how she had paid. Each answer was met with typing, with pauses, with glances exchanged just a little too often. She began to feel as though she were drifting further away from herself with every repetition. "I need my passport," she said again. "It's in my cabin." One of the officers nodded. "We'll look into that." Time stretched. The hum of the ship felt louder here, the vibration more intrusive. When another officer entered, he did not sit. He leaned against the wall, arms folded loosely, and watched her as if assessing something that could not be measured on a screen. "There's no record of your embarkation," he said. "No payment, no assigned cabin, no passenger profile." "That doesn't make sense," she said. "You don't just walk onto a ship like this?" He smiled faintly. "That's correct." She felt a flicker of anger then, sharp and unfamiliar. "Then how do you explain me being here?" The officer's smile faded. "That's what we're trying to determine." They allowed her to use a phone under supervision. She dialed the number of the travel agent she had booked through, her fingers trembling as the call rang out. When the agent answered, relief flooded her. Briefly, the agent confirmed the booking, then hesitated. "I can see your reservation," the agent said slowly, "but it's showing as canceled prior to departure." "That's not possible," she said. "I boarded." "I understand," the agent replied carefully. "But on our end, it shows you never checked in." The line went dead. The officer took the phone from her hand. "Thank you," he said. They escorted her back into the public areas of the ship, but something had changed. She noticed it immediately. Crew members no longer met her eyes. Doors she passed seemed subtly off limits. Her presence drew attention, not curiosity, awareness. When the announcement came that the ship would be docking later that afternoon, her stomach tightened. She realized, with a cold clarity, that whatever decision had been made about her would be finalized then. They told her it would be easier to sort things out once docked, that port authorities could help, that embassies existed for a reason. Their words were reasonable, their tone almost kind, but she understood the truth beneath it. Once she stepped off the ship, she would not be coming back. She followed security onto the open deck as the coastline came into view. Unfamiliar buildings, signs in a language she did not understand, the colors of a place she had never planned to visit. The ship slowed. Ropes were prepared. Passengers gathered along the rails, excited, oblivious. When they reached the gangway, an officer gestured politely. "This way." She stopped. "My things are still on board," she said. "My clothes, my passport, my envelope." "We'll take care of it," he said, already turning away. She looked back at the ship. The decks stacked above her, the windows glinting in the sun. Somewhere inside was everything she had brought with her, everything she needed to prove who she was. The gangway felt solid beneath her feet as she stepped onto foreign ground. Behind her, the ship's doors closed. She did not realize until much later that this was the last moment anyone officially acknowledged her presence on board. Because when the ship sailed again, it would do so without her. The port was louder than she expected. Engines idled. Voices echoed. Forklifts beeped as they reversed, weaving between stacks of cargo. Passengers streamed past her in clusters, laughing, pointing, already absorbed by the novelty of somewhere new. No one noticed the woman standing still at the edge of it all, clutching an empty handbag and staring back at the ship. She waited for someone to return, for a crew member to appear with her passport. for security to realize there had been a mistake. But the gangway remained closed, and after a while, the ship began to pull away. Slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the world. She watched until the gap between ship and shore widened, until the white hull slid forward and became just another moving thing among many. When it finally disappeared from view, something inside her went very quiet. She turned back to the terminal. Inside, the signs were unfamiliar. The language blurred together, shapes and accents she couldn't quite grasp. She approached a desk where an official sat behind thick glass, his expression already tired. She explained as calmly as she could. She had been on a ship. Her documents were on board. There had been an error. The official listened, nodded, then asked for her passport. "I don't have it," she said. "It's on the ship." He shook his head gently. No passport, no record. She felt a faint pressure behind her eyes. "The ship has my details." He tapped at a keyboard, then frowned. "The ship reports no such passenger." The words landed like a closed door. Final. Unyielding. She tried again at another desk, then another. Each time the answer was the same: polite, impersonal, immovable. Without identification, without proof, she was not a problem to be solved. She was an inconvenience to be managed. By late afternoon, she found herself sitting on a bench outside the terminal, the heat pressing down on her shoulders. Her phone was gone. Her money was gone. Everything she owned was somewhere at sea, carried away by a ship that insisted she had never stepped foot on it. She thought of the envelope then, of why she had come. The weight of it in her hand the night before, the promise she had made. The irony settled heavily in her chest. She had crossed an ocean to honor someone's memory, only to lose her own place in the world. As evening crept in, fear began to edge closer. Not sharp panic, but something colder and steadier. How long could a person exist like this? How long before being unseen turned into being unsafe? She found a small cafe near the edge of the port and ordered tea using the last coin she had in her pocket. The cup trembled slightly as she lifted it. Around her, conversations flowed easily, lives continuing without pause. She had never felt so distinctly separate from the world. That night, she slept in a chair at the terminal, her bag tucked under her arm, the lights never fully dimming. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the corridor again, the container, the man's face lifting toward hers, the moment that had split her life into before and after. By morning, she understood something with terrifying clarity. This had not been an accident, and if she did not find a way to prove she existed, no one else was going to do it for her. Morning brought no relief, only clarity. The terminal woke slowly around her, lights brightening, doors opening, the steady rhythm of arrivals and departures, resuming as if nothing had happened. She washed her face in a public restroom and studied her reflection. Tired, but still herself. That mattered more than she expected. She returned to the main desk once more, not because she believed it would work, but because giving up felt worse. The official on duty listened politely, then asked for her passport. When she couldn't produce it, his attention drifted, already moving on. "Is there anyone," she asked carefully, "who handles incidents involving missing passengers?" He hesitated, just a fraction, then pointed toward an office at the far end of the terminal. "You can try there," he said. "No promises." The office was smaller, quieter. A woman sat behind the desk, older than the others, glasses perched low on her nose as she read something on a screen. She looked up as she entered, really looked, and that alone felt like a gift. "I was on a cruise ship," she began. "They say I wasn't." The woman didn't interrupt. She didn't sigh or glance at the clock. She listened as the story came out in pieces. The cabin, the key card, the corridor, the docking. When she finished, there was a pause. "People don't disappear by accident," the woman said finally. The words settled between them, solid and grounding. She felt her throat tighten. "I saw something," she said quietly. "I don't think I was meant to." The woman leaned back slightly. "What did you see?" She described the corridor, the container, the man whose face she recognized but had never expected to see there. She spoke slowly, carefully, choosing each detail she could trust herself to remember. The woman's expression changed, not to alarm, but to focus. She typed a name into her computer, then another. When she looked up again, there was something like respect in her eyes. "You should know," she said, lowering her voice, "that this won't be quick or easy." "I don't need easy," she replied. "I just need someone to believe me." The woman nodded once. "Then we'll start there." She made a phone call, stepping just outside the office. Through the glass, she watched the woman gesture, heard fragments of conversation she couldn't quite catch. When she returned, she slid a small notepad across the desk. "Write down everything you remember," she said. "Times, phrases, names, even the things that feel unimportant." As she wrote, something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, but it no longer filled every corner. Memory became a weapon instead of a burden. Each detail she set down felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. When she finished, the woman folded the paper carefully. "I can't promise outcomes," she said, "but I can promise this won't vanish quietly." For the first time since stepping onto the dock, she felt the faintest sense of balance return. She was still stranded, still undocumented, still officially absent. But now, someone else knew her name. And somewhere far from the port, in places where decisions were made behind closed doors, the consequences of a single keystroke were beginning to stir. The journalist arrived late in the afternoon, carrying nothing more than a notebook and a tired expression that suggested he had seen too many stories fall apart before they ever reached the page. He introduced himself simply and sat across from her without ceremony. The woman from the port office remained nearby, arms folded, listening. "I'm not here to promise anything," the journalist said. "I'm here to decide whether this is worth asking questions about." She nodded. "That's fair." He asked her to start from the beginning, not the boarding, the reason. Why she had taken the cruise at all. She told him about the envelope, about the promise she had made, about how the journey was meant to close a chapter she had carried for too long. When she reached the corridor, her voice tightened, but she didn't stop. She described the container again, the way it had been handled, the man who did not belong where she saw him, the brief moment of eye contact that had changed everything. The journalist didn't interrupt, but he stopped writing when she spoke the name. "That's a serious accusation," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't sure." He asked questions then, precise ones. Where exactly the corridor was, what time it had been, how long the exchange lasted, whether anyone else might have seen her. She answered as carefully as she could, reaching back through the fog of fear to the small, sharp details that had stayed with her. When he finished, he leaned back and exhaled. "Here's the problem," he said. "Officially, you weren't on the ship, which means, officially, you didn't see anything." She met his gaze. "Then officially, someone changed that." The journalist looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, not kindly but with interest. "That," he said, "is something I can work with." He made a phone call as soon as he stepped outside, his voice low and urgent. When he returned, he asked for permission to take photographs, not of her, but of the documents the port office had begun to assemble. Notes, logs, screenshots of refusals and denials. "Paper trails don't like being disturbed," he said. "They tend to leave fingerprints. That evening, the ship sent its first response. A carefully worded email arrived at the port office, stating that after a thorough review, there was no evidence of an unauthorized deletion. Passenger records were intact. No irregularities found. The woman at the desk snorted softly. That didn't take long. The journalist nodded. That means someone's nervous. Across the ocean, aboard the ship that continued its journey as if nothing had happened, a senior administrator sat staring at a screen displaying an internal access log. One line stood out. A record adjustment made during the night, flagged only now because someone had asked the wrong question in the right place. The administrator closed the file and rubbed his temples. He told himself it would be fine. These things always were. People without proof didn't last long. But later that night, another message arrived, then another. Requests for clarification. Questions phrased too carefully to ignore. The politician's office made a call, brief and sharp, instructing that all internal communication be routed through legal counsel. The machine that had erased her so easily was beginning to resist itself. Back at the port, she sat alone on a bench as the sun dipped toward the horizon. For the first time since the ship had left her behind, she allowed herself to imagine an ending that did not involve disappearing quietly. She still had no passport, no money, no certainty. But she had momentum. And somewhere far beyond the water, a carefully edited record was no longer as clean as it had been. The first sign came not with an apology or an admission, but with a shift in tone. The journalist returned the next morning with coffee and a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. He didn't sit right away. He paced once, then twice, as if organizing his thoughts before allowing them into the open. "Someone's asked my editor why I'm in this port," he said finally. "That doesn't happen unless a name matters." She felt her stomach tighten. What kind of name? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the paper and pointed to a small article buried near the back. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about the ship. It mentioned a delayed committee meeting, a vague scheduling conflict, and a senior official traveling abroad for personal reasons. "That's him," she said quietly. The journalist nodded. "It's nothing on its own, but it's the first public movement." Behind closed doors, conversations were happening at a different pace. Legal teams requested logs. Compliance officers reviewed access records. A single ship administrator found himself answering questions he hadn't expected to be asked about timestamps, authorizations, and why a passenger profile had been altered and then flagged as non-existent. The explanation offered was technical: a system error, a duplicate entry, a routine correction, but no one corrected a record by deleting it entirely. The port office received a call that afternoon from the cruise line's regional headquarters. Their tone was polite, concerned, rehearsed. They requested a meeting. They requested discretion. They requested time. "She's still here," the woman at the desk said evenly. "And she's still without her documents." A pause followed. Then, "We'll arrange temporary accommodation." That alone was an admission. The journalist smiled when he heard. They don't spend money unless they have to. That night, she lay in a clean hotel bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city beyond the window. The fear that had followed her since the dock was still there, but it had changed shape. It no longer pressed down on her chest. It hovered instead, uncertain. She thought about the corridor again, about the way the man's eyes had lifted to hers, assessing, calculating. She wondered if he remembered her now, or if she was still just an inconvenience he assumed would fade. He would know soon enough. By morning, the journalist had confirmation. Not proof, not yet, but alignment. Too many stories matched too neatly. A passenger record altered in the early hours. A restricted corridor. A sealed container, logged under a medical exemption that didn't quite hold up. The truth won't come out the way people expect, he told her. There won't be headlines with your name. No interviews. No public apology. She considered this, but it will come out. He nodded, quietly, the way things do when someone decides the risk is no longer worth it. That afternoon, a statement was released. The politician would be stepping back from duties temporarily due to personal matters. An independent review would follow. No details were provided. None were needed. She read the words twice, then folded the page. She had not been named. The ship had not admitted fault. The system had not apologized. But the weight had shifted. And for the first time since she had been erased, the world had moved, not past her, but because of her. The call came early, just after dawn. She answered before the second ring, her heart already bracing itself for disappointment. Instead, the voice on the other end was careful, measured, and unmistakably formal. "Good morning. We're calling regarding an irregularity in your travel record." Irregularity, not erasure, not deletion. She closed her eyes and listened. They asked her to come in, not to the port office this time, but to a conference room in a nearby building, one that smelled faintly of polished wood and strong coffee. 3 people waited for her. Representatives from the cruise line, a legal advisor, and a liaison from her embassy. No one smiled. They spoke slowly, choosing their words with care. A review had identified inconsistencies. A system correction had been made without proper authorization. Procedures had not been followed. Regret was expressed, though never directly addressed to her. Then the embassy liaison slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of her passport, boarding confirmation, a printed itinerary with her name exactly where it should have been. She pressed her fingers against the paper, grounding herself in its weight. "So I was there," she said. The liaison nodded. "Yes? You were?" The words settled into her bones. She had not imagined it. She had not been confused. She had not disappeared. Arrangements were made efficiently after that. Emergency travel documents, a return flight, compensation discussed but never dwelled upon. No one mentioned the corridor. No one mentioned the container. They didn't need to. When she stepped back outside, the morning air felt different, lighter, as though something heavy had been lifted from her shoulders. She sat on a low wall and let herself breathe, truly breathe, for the first time in days. Later that afternoon, the journalist called. "He's resigned," he said simply. "Personal reasons." She closed her eyes. "That's enough." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." That evening, she packed her small borrowed suitcase and prepared to leave the city that had held her when she had nowhere else to stand. She paused before closing the zipper, her hand hovering for a moment as she remembered the envelope she had lost to the sea. The promise remained unfulfilled. But the truth had been honored in its place. At the airport, as she handed over her documents, the agent scanned them and nodded without comment. No hesitation, no questions, just acceptance. She walked toward the gate with steady steps, no longer shrinking herself to fit into spaces that had tried to erase her. She carried her name with her now, fully restored, unedited. And as the plane lifted into the sky, she allowed herself one final thought, quiet and resolute. She had learned how easily the world could look away, and how powerful it was when it finally chose not to. She never spoke publicly about what happened. She didn't correct the records that quietly removed her, or seek acknowledgement from the people who had decided she was easier to erase than explain. Some truths, she learned, didn't need an audience to be real. What mattered was this. She returned home, knowing her memory had been trusted, her voice had been heard, and her name had been restored. not by force, but by persistence. The world moved on as it always does. Headlines changed, names faded, but she carried something new with her now. A steadiness that came from surviving something meant to make her disappear. And in the quiet moments that followed, she understood something she had never fully known before. She had always existed, even when others chose not to see her.